Good morning, and welcome back to Sleepless Tales. This is one of the first times I've ever recorded one of these in the morning because I wake up and the tears won't stop falling. Anyways, we'll be continuing with Heart of Darkness today. Hopefully I'll have more diction in my voice than I did last time. We'll see. Drinking my coffee right now. It's pretty good. Guys, I've been playing through Dishonored 2 recently. It takes place in a vaguely similar time period to this. It's a really good game. You should pick it up. I just finished the mission where you go back in time, which is kind of fucking wacky tacky. But anyways, let's hop into Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. This is Sleepless Tales as always. Don't forget to like, favorite, comment, and subscribe. Alright, the last time we left off, Marlowe, the main character, was just arriving at the steamboat in the heart of Africa. Hey, not of darkness. It's of Africa. Okay, it's different. But he just got there. He was talking to some dude. Not much too more than that, I don't think, of note. That's basically the gist. Anyways, okay, let's get started again. I did not see the real significance of that wreck at once. I fancy I see it now, but I'm not sure. Not at all. Certainly the affair was too stupid, when I think of it, to be altogether natural. Still, but at that moment it presented itself simply as a confounded nuisance. The steamer was sunk. Oh, bad news, guys. The steamer's sunk. Oh, so he did arrive, but it was wrecked. Ugh. They had started 2 days before in a sudden hurry up the river with the manager on board, in charge of some volunteer skipper. And before they had been out 3 hours, they tore the bottom of her out on some stones, and she sank near the south bank. I asked myself what I was to do there. Now my boat was lost. As a matter of fact, I had plenty to do in fishing my command out of the river. I had to set about it the very next day. That, and the repairs when I bought the pieces out of the station. It took some months. My first interview with the manager was curious. He did not ask me to sit down after my 20-mile walk that morning. He was commonplace in complexion, in features, in manners, and in voice. He was of middle size and of ordinary build. His eyes, of the usual blue, were perhaps remarkably cold, and he certainly could make his glance fall on one as trenchant and heavy as an axe. But even at these times, the rest of his person seemed to disclaim the intention. Otherwise, there was only an indefendable, faint expression of his lips, something stealthy, a smile, not a smile. I remember it, but I can't explain. It was unconscious, this smile was, though just after he had said something it got intensified for an instant. It came at the end of his speeches like a seal applied to the words to make meaning of the commonest phrase appear absolutely inscrutable. He was a common trader, from his youth up employed in these parts. Nothing more. He was obeyed, yet he inspired neither love nor fear, nor even respect. He inspired uneasiness. That's what it was, uneasiness. Not a definite mistrust, just uneasiness. Nothing more. You have no idea how effective such a faculty can be. He had no genius for organizing, for initiative, for order even. That was evident in such things as the deplorable state of the station. He had no learning, no intelligence. His position had come to him. Why? Perhaps because he was never ill. He had served 3 terms of years out there. Because triumphant health and the general rout of constitutions is a kind of power in itself. When he went home on leave, he rioted on a large scale, and pompously. Jack ashore, with a difference, and externals only. This one could gather up from his casual talk. He originated nothing. He could keep the routine going. That's all. But he was great. He was great by this little thing that it was impossible to tell what could control such a man. He never gave that secret away. Perhaps there was nothing within him. Such a suspicion made one pause, For out there were no external checks. Once, when various tropical diseases had laid low almost every agent in the station, he was heard to say, "Men who come out here should have no entrails." He sealed the utterance with a smile of his, as though it had been a door opening into a darkness he had in his keeping. You fancied you had seen things, but the seal was on. When annoyed at mealtimes by the constant quarrels of the white men about precedence, he ordered an immense round table to be made, for which a special house had to be built. This was the station's mess room, where he sat at the first place. The rest were nowhere. One felt this to be an unalterable conviction. He was neither civil nor uncivil. He was quiet. He allowed his boy, an overfed young gamer from the coast, to treat the white men, under his very eyes, with provoking insolence. He began to speak as soon as he saw me. I'd been very long on the road. He could not wait, had to start without me. The upriver stations had to be relieved. There had been so many delays already that he did not know who was dead and who was alive, and how they got on, and so on, and so on. He paid no attention to my explanations, and playing with a stick of sealing wax, repeated several times that the situation was very grave, very grave. There were rumors that a very important station was in jeopardy, and its chief, Mr. Kurtz, was ill. I hoped it was not true. Mr. Kurtz was, I felt weird and irritable. Hang Kurtz, I thought. I interrupted him by saying I had heard of Mr. Kurtz on the coast. Ah, so they talk of him down there, he murmured to himself. Then he began again, assuring me Mr. Kurtz was the best agent he had, an exceptional man, of the greatest importance to the company. Therefore, I could understand his anxiety. He was, he said, very, very uneasy. Certainly, he fidgeted on his chair a good deal, exclaimed, "Ah, Mr. Kurtz," broke the stick of sealing wax, and seemed dumbfounded by the accident. Next thing he wanted to know was how long it would take to... I interrupted him again. Being hungry, I kept on my feet, too. I was getting savage. "How can I tell?" I said. "I haven't seen the wreck yet. Some months, no doubt." All this talk seemed to me so futile. "Some months," he said. "Well, let us say 3 months before we can make a start." "Yes, that ought to do the affair." I flung out of his hut. He lived all alone in a clay hut with a sort of veranda, muttering to myself my opinion of him. He was a chattering idiot. Afterwards, I took it back when it was borne in upon me startlingly, with that extreme nicety he had estimated the time requisite for the affair. I went to work the next day, turning, so to speak, my back on that station. In that way, only it seemed to me I could keep my hold on the redeeming facts of life. And still, one must look about sometimes. And then I saw the station, these men strolling aimlessly about in the sunshine of the yard. I asked myself sometimes what it all meant. They wandered here and there with their absurd long staves in their hands, like a lot of faithless pilgrims bewitched inside a rotten fence. The word ivory rang in the air. It was whispered, it was sighed. You would think they were praying to it. A taint of imbecile rhapsody blew through it all, like a whiff from some corpse. By Jove, I've never seen anything so unreal in my life. And outside, the silent wilderness surrounding this clear speck on the earth struck me as something evil and invincible, like evil or truth, waiting patiently for the passing away of this fantastic invasion. Oh, these months. Well, never mind. Various things happened. One evening, a grass shed full of calico, cotton prints, beads, I don't know what else, burst into a blaze so suddenly that you'd have thought the earth had opened and let the avenging fire consume all that trash. I was smoking my pipe quietly by my dismantled steamer and saw them all cutting capers in the light, with their arms lifted high, when the stout man with mustaches came tearing down the river, a tin pail in his hand, and assured me that everybody was behaving splendidly, dipped about a quart of water and tore back again. I noticed there was a hole in the bottom of his pail. I strolled up. There was no hurry. You see, the thing had gone off like a box of matches. It had been hopeless from the very first. The flame had leaped high, and driven everybody back, lighted up everything, and collapsed. The shed was already a heap of embers glowing fiercely. A gamer was being beaten nearby. They said he had caused the fire in some way. Be that as it may, he was screeching most horribly. I saw him later, for several days sitting in a bit of shade looking very sick and trying to recover himself. Afterwards, he arose and went out, and the wilderness, without a sound, took him into its bosom again. As I approached the glow from the dark, I found myself at the back of two men, talking. I heard the name of Kurtz pronounced, then the words, "Take advantage of this unfortunate incident." One of the men was the manager. I wished him a good evening. "Do you ever see anything like it? It's incredible," he said, and walked off. The other man remained. He was a first-class agent, young, gentlemanly, a bit reserved, with a forked little beard and a hooked nose. He was standoffish with the other agents, and they on their side said he was the manager's spy upon them. As to me, I had hardly ever spoken to him before. We got into talk, and by we strolled away from the hissing ruins. Then he asked me to his room, which was in the main building of the station. He struck a match, and I perceived that this young aristocrat had only a silver-mounted dressing case, but only a whole candle all to himself. Just at that time, the manager was the only man supposed to have any right to candles. Native mats covered the clay walls. A collection of spears, assegais, shields, knives was hung up in trophies. The business entrusted to this fellow was the making of bricks, so I had been informed. But there wasn't a fragment of a brick anywhere in the station, and he had been there more than a year, waiting. It seems he could not make bricks without something. I don't know what. Straw, maybe. Anyways, it could not be found there, and as it was not likely to be sent from Europe, it did not appear clear to me what he was waiting for. An act of special creation, perhaps. However, they were all waiting, all the 16 or 20 pilgrims of them, for something, and upon my word, it did not seem an uncongenial occupation, from the way they took it, though the only thing they ever came to them was disease, as far as I could see. They beguiled the time by backbiting and intriguing against each other in a foolish kind of way. There was an air of plotting about the station, but nothing came of it, of course. It was as unreal as everything else, as the philanthropic pretense of the whole concern, as their talk, as their government, as their show of work. The only real feeling was a desire to get appointed to a trading post where ivory was to be had, so that they could earn percentages. They intrigued and slandered and hated each other, only on that account. But as to effectually lifting a little finger, oh, no. By heavens, there's something after all in the world of allowing one man to steal a horse, while another must not look at a halter. Steal a horse straight out. Very well, he's done it. Perhaps he can ride. But there's a way of looking at a halter that would provoke the most charitable of saints into a kick. I had no idea why he wanted to be sociable. But as we chatted in there, it suddenly occurred to me that the fellow was trying to get at something. In fact, pumping me. He alluded constantly to Europe, to the people I was supposed to know there, and putting leading questions as to my acquaintances in the sepulchral city, and so on. His little eyes glittered like mica discs, with curiosity, though he tried to keep up a bit of superciliousness. At first, I was astonished, but very soon I became awfully curious to see what he would find out from me. I couldn't possibly imagine what I had in me to make it worth my while. It was very pretty to see how he baffled himself, for in truth, my body was full only of chills, and my head had nothing in it but that wretched steamboat business. It was evident he took me for a perfectly shameless provocateur. At last he got angry, and to conceal a movement of furious annoyance, he yawned. I rose. Then I noticed a small sketch in oils, on a panel representing a woman, draped and blindfolded, carrying a lighted torch. The background was somber, almost black. The movement of the woman was stately, and the effect of the torchlight made the face sinister. It arrested me, and he stood by civilly, holding an empty half-pint champagne bottle, medical comforts, with the candle stuck in it. To my question, he said Mr. Kurtz had painted this, and this very station, more than a year ago, while waiting for means to go to his trading post. "Tell me, pray," said I, "who is this Mr. Kurtz?" "The chief of the inner station," he answered in a short tone, looking away. "Much obliged," I said, laughing. "And you're the brickmaker of the central station. Everyone knows that." He was silent for a while. "He's a prodigy," he said at last. "He is an emissary of pity and science and progress, and devil knows what else. We want," he began to declaim suddenly, "for the guidance of the cause entrusted to us by Europe, so to speak, higher intelligence, wide sympathies, a singleness of purpose." "Who says that?" I asked. "Lots of 'em," he replied. "Some even write that, and so he comes here, a special being, as you ought to know." "Why ought I know?" I interrupted, really surprised. He paid no attention. "Yes, today he is a chief of the best station. Next year he'll be assistant manager. 2 years more and... But I dare say you know what he'll be in 2 years' time. You're of the new gang, the gang of virtue. The same people who sent him specially also recommended you. Oh, don't say no. I've my own eyes to trust." Light dawned upon me. My dear old aunt's influential acquaintances were producing an unexpected effect upon the young man. I nearly burst into a laugh. "Do you read the company's confidential correspondence?" I asked. He hadn't a word to say. It was great fun. "When Mr. Kurtz," I continued, severely, "is general manager, you won't have the opportunity." He blew the candle out suddenly, and we went outside. The moon had risen, and black figures strolled about listlessly, pouring water on the glow, whence proceeded a sound of hissing. Steam ascended into the moonlight. The beaten gamer groaned somewhere. "What a row that brute makes," said the indefatigable man with the mustaches, appearing near us. "Serves him right. Transgression, punishment, bang, pitiless, pitiless. That's the only way. This will prevent all conflagrations for the future." I was just telling the manager. He noticed my compassion and became crestfallen all at once. "Not in bed yet," he said, with a kind of servile heartiness. "It's so natural. Ha! Danger, agitation." He vanished. I went on to the riverside, and the other followed me. I heard a scathing murmur at my ear. "Heap of muffs. Go to." The pilgrims could be seen knots, gesticulating, and discussing. Several still had their staves in their hands. I verily believe they took these sticks to bed with them. Beyond the fence, the four stood up spectrally in the moonlight, and through that dim stir, though the faint sounds of the lamentable courtyard, the silence of the land went home to one's very heart, its mystery, its greatness, the amazing reality of concealed life. The hurt gamer moaned feebly somewhere nearby, and then fetched a deep sigh that made me mend my pace away from here. I felt a hand introducing itself under my arm. "My dear sir," said the fellow, "I don't want to be misunderstood, and especially by you, who will see Mr. Kurtz before long, and before I have that pleasure. I wouldn't like him to get a false idea of my disposition." I let him run on, this papier-mâché Mephistopheles, and it seemed to me that if I tried to poke my forefinger through him, he would find nothing inside but a little loose dirt. Maybe. He, don't you see, had been planning to be assistant manager by and by under the present man, and I could see that the coming of that Kurtz had upset them both, not a little. He talked precipitately, and I did not try to stop him. I had my shoulders against the wreck of my steamer, hauled up the slope like a carcass of some big river animal. The smell of mud, of primeval mud, by Jove, was in my nostrils. The high stillness of primeval forest was before my eyes. There were shiny patches on the black creek. The moon had spread over everything, a thin layer of silver, over the rank grass, over the mud, upon the wall of matted vegetation, standing higher than a wall of a temple. Over the great river, I could see through a somber gap, glittering, as it flowed broadly by without a murmur. All this was great, expectant, mute, while the man jabbered about himself. I wondered whether the stillness on the face of the immensity looking at us, too, were meant as an appeal or as a menace. What were he had stayed to be strayed in here? Could we handle that dumb thing, or would it handle us? I felt how big, unconfoundedly long, was that thing that couldn't talk, and perhaps is deaf as well. What was in there? I could see a little ivory coming out from there, and I had heard from Mr. Kurtz was in there. I had heard enough about it, too, God knows. Yet somehow it didn't bring any image with it, no more than if I had been told an angel or a fiend was in there. I believed it in the same way as one might believe that there were inhabitants in the planet Mars. I knew once a Scotch sailmaker who was certain, dead sure, that there were people in Mars. If you had asked him for some idea how they looked and behaved, he would get shy and mutter something about walking on all fours. If you as much as smiled, he would, though a man of 60, offer to fight you. I would not have gone as far to fight for Kurtz, but I went to hear him near enough to a lie. You know, I hate, detest, I can't bear a lie. Not because I'm a straighter than the rest of us, but simply because it appalls me. There's a taint of death, a flavor of mortality in lies, which is exactly what I hate and detest in all this world, what I want to forget. It makes me miserable and sick, like biting something rotten would do. Temperament, I suppose. Well, I went near enough to it by letting the young fool there believe anything you would like to imagine as to my influence in Europe. I became in an instant as much of a pretense as the rest of the bewitched pilgrims. This simply because I had the notion it somehow would be of help to that Kurtz, whom at the time I did not see, you understand. He was just a word for me. I did not see the man in that name any more than you do. You see him? Do you see the story? Do you see anything? It seems to me that I'm trying to tell you a dream, making a vain attempt, because of no relation of a dream can convey the dream sensation, that commingling of absurdity, surprise, and bewilderment in a tremor of struggling revolt, that notion of being captured by the incredible, which is the very essence of dreams. He was silent for a while, the speaker of the story. No, it's impossible. It is impossible to convey the life sensation of any given epoch of one's existence. That which makes its truth, its meaning, its subtle and penetrating essence. It is impossible. We live, as we dream, alone. He paused again, as if reflecting, then added, Of course, in this you fellows see more than I could then. You see, whom you know. It had become so pitch dark that we listeners could hardly see one another. For a long time already he, sitting apart, had been no more to us than a voice. There was not a word from anybody. The others must have been asleep, but I was awake. I listened on the watch for the sentence, for the word that would give me the clue to the faintest uneasiness inspired by this narrative that seemed to shape itself without human lips in the heavy night air of the river. Yes, I let him run on, Marlowe began again, and think that he pleased about what his powers were behind me. I did. There was nothing behind me. There was nothing but that wretched, old, mangled steamboat I was leaning against. While he talked fluently about the necessity for every man to get on, and when one comes out here, you conceive it is not to gaze at the moon, Mr. Kurtz was a universal genius, but even a genius would find it easier to work with adequate tools, intelligent men. He did not make bricks. Why? There was a physical impossibility in the way, as I was well aware, and if he did secretarial work for the manager, it was because no sensible man rejects wantonly the confidence of his superiors. Did I see it? I saw it. What more did I want? What I really wanted was rivets, by heavens, rivets, to get on with the work, to stop the hole. Rivets I wanted. There were cases of them down at the coast, cases all piled up, burst and split. You kicked a loose rivet at every second step in the station yard on the hillside. Rivets had rolled into the grove of death. You could fill your pockets with rivets for the trouble of stooping down, and there wasn't one rivet to be found where it was wanted. We had plates that would do, but nothing to fasten them with. And every week the messenger, a long gamer, letter bag on his shoulder and staff in hand, left our station for the coast. And several times a week a coast caravan came in with trade goods, ghastly glazed calico that made you shudder only to look at, glass beads, value about a penny a quart, confounded spotted cotton handkerchiefs, and no rivets. 3 carriers could have brought all that we wanted, set the steamboat afloat. He's becoming confidential now, but I fancy my unresponsive attitude must have exasperated him at last, for he judged it necessary to inform me he feared neither God nor the devil, let alone any mere man. I said I could see that very well, but what I wanted was a certain quantity of rivets, and rivets were what really Mr. Kurtz wanted, if he had only known it. Now, letters went to the coast every week. My dear sir, he cried, I write from dictation. I demanded rivets. There was a way, for an intelligent man. He changed his manner, became very cold, and suddenly began to talk about a hippopotamus. I wondered whether sleeping on board the steamer. I stuck to my salvage night and day. I wasn't disturbed. There was an old hippo, with the bad habit of getting out on the bank and roaming at night over the station grounds. The pilgrims used to turn out in a body and empty every rifle they could to lay hands on him. Some even had sat up at nights for him. All this energy was wasted, though. That animal has a charmed life, he said. But you can say that only of brutes in this country. No man. You apprehend me. No man here bears a charmed life. He stood there for a moment in the moonlight with his delicate hooked nose set a little askew, and his mica eyes glittering without a wink. Then, with a curt good night, he strode off. I could see he was disturbed and considerably puzzled, which made me feel more hopeful than I had been for days. It was a great comfort to turn from that camp to my influential friend, the battered, twisted, ruined tin-pot steamboat. I clambered on board. She rang under my feet like an empty Huntley and Palmer biscuit tin kicked along a gutter. She was nothing so solid in make, and rather less pretty in shape, but I expended enough hard work on her to make me love her. No influential friend would have served me better. She had given me a chance to come out a bit, to find out what I could do. No, I don't like work. I'd rather laze about and think of all the fine things that can be done. I don't like work. No man does. But I like what's in the work, the chance to find yourself. Your own reality, for yourself, not for others. What no other man can ever know. They can only see the mere show, and never can tell what it really means. I was not surprised to see somebody sitting aft, on the deck with his legs dangling over the mud. You see, I rather chummed with the few mechanics that were in the station, whom the other pilgrims naturally despised, on account of their imperfect manners, I suppose. This was the foreman, a boiler-maker by trade, a good worker. He was a lank, bony, yellow-faced man with big, intense eyes. His aspect was worried, and his head was bald as the palm of my hand. But his hair in falling seemed to have struck to his chin, and he prospered in the new locality, for his beard hung down to his waist. He was a widower with 6 young children. He had left him in charge of a sister of his to come out here. And the passion of his life was pigeon flying. He was an enthusiast and a connoisseur. He would rave about pigeons. After work, he used sometimes to come over from his hut for a talk about his children and his pigeons. At work, when he had to crawl in the mud under the bottom of the steamboat, he would tie up that beard of his in a kind of white serviette he bought for that purpose. It had loops to go over his ears. In the evening, he could be seen squatted on the bank, rinsing that wrapper in the creek with great care, then spreading it solemnly on a bush to dry. I slapped him on the back and shouted, "We shall have rivets." He scrambled to his feet, exclaiming, "No, rivets," as though he couldn't believe his ears. Then in a low voice, "You, huh?" I don't know why we behaved like lunatics. I put my finger to the side of my nose and nodded mysteriously. "Good for you," he cried, snapped his fingers above his head, lifting one foot. I tried a jig. We capered on the iron deck. A frightful clatter came out of that hulk, and the virgin force on the other bank of the creek sent it back in a thundering roll upon the sleeping station. It must have made some of the pilgrims sit up in their hovels. A dark figure obscured the lighted doorway of the manager's hut. Vanished, and then, a second or so after, the doorway itself vanished, too. We stopped, and the silence driven away by the stamping of our feet flowed back again from the recesses of the land. The great wall of vegetation, an exuberant and entangled mass of trunks, branches, leaves, boughs, festoons, motionless in the moonlight, was like a rioting invasion of soundless life, a rolling wave of plants, piled up, crested, ready to topple over the creek, to sweep every little man of us out in his little existence. And it moved not. A deadened burst of mighty splashes and snorts reached us from afar, and though an Isocothaurus had been taking a bath of glitter in the great river. "After all," said the Boilermaker in a reasonable tone, "why shouldn't we get rivets? Why not, indeed?" I did not know of any reason why we shouldn't. "They'll come in 3 weeks," I said confidently. But they didn't. Instead of rivets, there came an invasion, an affliction, a visitation. It came in sections during the next 3 weeks, each section headed by a donkey carrying a white man in new clothes and tan shoes, bowing from that elevation right and left to the impressed pilgrims. A quarrelsome band of footsore, sulky gamers trod on the heels of the donkey. A lot of tents, camp stools, tin boxes, white cases, brown bales would be shot down in the courtyard, and the air of mystery would deepen a little over the muddle of the station. 5 such installments came, with their absurd air of disorderly flight, with the loot of innumerable outfit shops and provision stores, that one would think they were lugging, after a raid, into the wilderness for equitable division. It was an inextricable mess of things decent in themselves, but that human folly made it look like the spoils of thieving. The devoted band called itself the Eldorado Exploring Expedition, and I believe that they were sworn to secrecy. Their talk, however, was the talk of a sordid buccaneer. It was reckless, without hardihood, greedy, without audacity, and cruel, without courage. There was not an atom of foresight or of serious intention in the whole batch of them, and they did not seem aware these things are wanted for the work of the world. To tear treasure out of the bowels of the land was their desire, with no more moral purpose at the back of it than there was in burglars breaking into a safe. Who paid the expenses of the noble enterprise, I don't know, but the uncle of our manager was the leader of that lot. In exterior, he resembled a butcher in a poor neighborhood, and his eyes had a look of sleepy cunning. He carried his fat paunch with ostentation on his short legs, and during the time his gang infested the station, spoke to no one but his nephew. You could see these two roaming all about, all day, with their long heads close together in an everlasting confab. I had given up worrying about the rivets. One capacity for that I find of folly is more limited than you'd suppose. I said hang, and let things slide. I had plenty of time for meditation, and now and then I would give some thought to Kurtz. I wasn't very interested in him, no. Still, I was curious to see whether this man, who had come out equipped with moral ideas of some sort, would climb to the top, after all, and how he would set about his work when there. Guys, that's the end of part 1 of Heart of Darkness. Proud of you guys for making it this far. That was a much longer chapter than I expected. Or part, let's say. That brings us somehow almost halfway through this book. You'd be surprised. Making great progress. I'm proud of everybody listening to this. Big sip, guys. Big sip of that sweet coffee. I've eaten nothing but cookies for 3 days now. I might vomit soon. Anyways, this is Sleepless Tales as always. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and subscribe. If you don't, you better have a good night instead, because I'm watching you from your windowsill. Yep, see you in the next part. Goodbye.